You feel the pain arrive in a wave, low and tight across your hips, and you don't lie down. You squat. Someone you trust grips you from behind, taking part of your weight onto their own body, and the ground is right there to catch whatever comes next. For nearly the entire history of your species, this is what being born looked like. Today, that same contraction would likely put you flat on your back, alone under fluorescent lights, working against the very gravity your ancestors used to their advantage. Something changed about how you arrive into the world. Your body didn't. For roughly 300,000 years, giving birth was never something a woman did completely alone. Not occasionally. Structurally, it was built into the shape of your own skeleton long before anyone wrote down a single birth story. So why would something this personal have always required a crowd? The answer starts about 6 million years ago, when your ancestors stood upright. Walking on two legs meant a narrower pelvis. Around the same stretch of evolutionary time, the human brain began tripling in size. You ended up with a passenger that needed more room, born to a body with less of it to give. How does a single species end up fighting its own skeleton like that? Anthropologists Karen Rosenberg and Wenda Trevathan have spent decades studying this exact mismatch, and they call it the obstetrical dilemma, a technical name for a simple problem. Your body solved an impossible engineering puzzle by changing the rules of birth itself, instead of changing the dimensions. You can actually hold a piece of evidence for this trade-off, or at least scientists can. In 2001, researchers working in the Ghana region of Ethiopia uncovered a nearly complete fossil pelvis belonging to a female Homo erectus, an ancestor species that lived more than 1 million years ago. Paleontologist Scott Simpson and his team published the find in 2008, and it showed something nobody expected. Her hips were already wider than predicted, shaped for a baby with a bigger brain than scientists had assumed her species could deliver. The skeleton itself was already negotiating the same problem your body negotiates today, one birth at a time. That same trade-off explains something else most new parents don't see coming: how strikingly helpless a human newborn actually is, compared to almost any other primate. A baby chimpanzee can grip its mother's fur and hang on within hours of being born. A human newborn can't even hold up its own head. So what happens to a baby that arrives this unfinished? Researchers call it secondary altriciality, a term for the fact that your species essentially shortened pregnancy to get the baby out before its head outgrew the exit. The result is an infant who finishes an enormous amount of brain growth outside the womb instead of inside it, sometimes nicknamed the fourth trimester. Birth, in other words, was never the finish line. It was closer to the starting gun for an equally demanding stretch. That problem reshaped how birth was positioned, too, almost everywhere except recent hospitals. Look through ethnographic records from traditional societies across nearly every continent, and the same default position for labor shows up again and again. Upright, squatting, kneeling, sometimes standing while holding onto a rope or a branch. Gravity helps the baby move down, and the pelvis itself opens slightly wider this way than it does lying flat on a bed. If gravity does half the work for free, why would anyone design a system that fights it? The position that became standard in Western hospitals by the early 1900s wasn't an upgrade for the person doing the labor. It mostly made things easier for the doctor watching from the foot of the bed, and the body that solved this engineering problem didn't solve it by itself, either. Anthropologist Sarah Blaffer HRDY has documented how human child-rearing relied, deep into prehistory, on what researchers call cooperative breeding, a wide circle of caregivers beyond the biological mother, grandmothers and aunts and older sisters, all sharing the work of keeping a child alive. Birth was the very first moment this circle switched on. A woman in labor 50,000 years ago wasn't tucked away somewhere private. She was almost certainly surrounded by the same people who would go on to help raise that baby for years afterward. Here's where it gets genuinely strange, though. In dozens of unrelated cultures across parts of South America, Southeast Asia, and the Basque region of Europe, anthropologists have documented something called the kavod, a term the Victorian scholar Edward Burnett Tylor coined back in 1865, borrowed from a French word meaning roughly to hatch. During kavod, a father takes to his own bed at the same time his partner goes into labor. He sometimes groans as if he, too, is in pain. He often follows the same food restrictions she does and avoids hard physical work for days afterward. and in some recorded communities, neighbors treat him as though he had just given birth himself. What does a man lying in bed groaning have to do with childbirth? More than it looks like. It was a public claim, performed in front of the whole community. This child belongs to both of us, and you all just watched us both go through something for it. So picture how this might have actually looked, somewhere around a fire, deep in human prehistory. A woman feels her first real contraction as the sun goes down. She doesn't slip away alone. She moves toward the women already gathering, her mother setting water to warm, her sister stepping behind her to take some of her weight. A short distance off, her partner sits apart from the rest of camp, eating only what she's allowed to eat that day, following rules he doesn't strictly need to follow but won't break anyway. Hours later, the baby arrives in a squat, 3 sets of hands ready to catch and steady. Afterward, she likely doesn't go straight back to normal life, either. Many traditional cultures observe a deliberate seclusion period after birth, weeks of rest, special food, and limited visitors, built specifically around the fact that a new mother's body and a brand new, half-finished brain both need protected time. By the time it's all over, almost the entire camp has, in some small way, taken part in this one birth. And ancient humans solved another problem you might assume needed modern technology: spacing births apart. What kind of birth control doesn't require a single tool, herb, or calendar? Richard Lee began studying the Jew/Hoansi, often called the Kung San, hunter-gatherers of the Kalahari Desert, starting in 1963. The research that grew out of that project found something that looked almost like an accident of biology. Mothers nursed constantly, brief feeds, sometimes every 15 minutes, day and night, for years at a stretch. That relentless nursing pattern suppresses the hormones needed for ovulation. The result was an average gap of nearly 4 years between births, achieved with nothing but the rhythm of how they fed the last child. No herbs, no devices, just biology used on purpose. It's tempting to assume all of this just means ancient birth was simply cruder than anything available today, full stop. In some ways, it genuinely was more dangerous. Maternal mortality before modern medicine was brutal, and nobody should romanticize that part away. But were the methods themselves actually crude, or just unfamiliar? They were finely tuned to the realities of the human body and human social life in ways modern medicine is only now circling back toward. The upright squat is being reintroduced in some hospitals as an alternative to lying flat. The constant presence of a trained, supportive companion during labor, what a doula provides today, is something Trevathan's own research argues is closer to an evolutionary requirement than a modern luxury. Even kavod, strange as it looks from the outside, solved a problem plenty of modern fathers still describe out loud: feeling like a bystander to something happening to the person they love most. Which brings it back to you. Picture the version of this moment you're more likely to recognize. A hospital room. One nervous partner standing near the bed, no wider circle of support anywhere in sight, and a return to normal life expected within days instead of weeks. What's actually missing from that picture, compared to almost every other version of this moment across human history? It isn't medicine. It's company and time. For 300,000 years, an entire community organized itself, in ways large and small, around the fact that one of its members was bringing in the next one, and that the work didn't stop the moment the baby took its first breath. You feel the pain arrive in a wave, low and tight across your hips. But trace the position your body naturally wants to take, the people who still show up around you. Even the half-remembered rituals still hanging on in baby showers and confinement traditions today, all the way back far enough, and one thing becomes hard to miss. You were never supposed to do this completely alone. Your ancestors made sure of that. And somewhere underneath the fluorescent lights and the paperwork, your body still remembers it.